Welcome to the Top 10 at 10. Today is May the 20th, 2014. I'm your host, Dan Wright, writer at FarDogLake.com, and these are the top 10 stories. Or should be. Yes. Story number 10 from the New York Times. Despite calls for release, activist in Occupy case gets 3 months. A woman whose assault case had become a cause celeb, first among Occupy Wall Street supporters, and then expanding well beyond the movement, was sentenced to 3 months in jail on Monday as a judge rejected calls for her immediate release. The woman, Cecily McMillan, 25, a graduate student at the New School and a volunteer labor organizer, was convicted 2 weeks ago of assaulting a police officer at Zuccotti Park in Manhattan in 2012. Before the sentence was delivered, Ms. McMillan remained mostly defiant, even as she characterized the encounter with the officer as an accident. "I cannot confess to a crime I did not commit," she said in State Supreme Court in Manhattan. But Justice Ronald Zwabel, who had remanded Ms. McMillan on May 5th after the 4-week trial, imposed the jail sentence that prosecutors had requested rather than release her on probation, as her lawyers had argued. She could have faced a maximum of 7 years for second-degree assault. Quote, "A civilized society must not allow an assault to be committed under the guise of civil disobedience," Justice Zwabel said. The trial became a rallying point among people who sympathized with Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011 and 2012, which called attention to the gap between rich and poor and criticized the government bailout of big banks. Many of Ms. McMillan's supporters saw in her a potential symbol of the police crackdown that ended the occupation of Zuccotti Park and snuffed out the protest's momentum. Upon her conviction, Ms. McMillan supporters wrote scores of letters to Judge Zwabel urging him to be lenient. 5 city council members delivered the same message on the steps of City Hall, and the Russian activist Pussy Riot, who were recently imprisoned for criticizing President Vladimir Putin, visited her on Rikers Island and called for her release. An online petition calling for leniency garnered 160,000 signatures. So there you go. 3-month sentence, so I guess 90 days. And another chapter in the Occupy Wall Street saga. Not a particularly good one, but there it is. Story number 9. Feds say Chinese military hackers damaged American companies. This is from Huffington Post. The United States escalated a standoff with the Chinese government on Monday over the alleged use of hacking by military officials to give Chinese companies an advantage over American industries. At a Justice Department press conference, officials announced the indictment of 5 members of the Chinese military on federal hacking charges. Wang Dong, Sun Keiling, Wen Xinghu, Huang Zhenghu, and Gu Chengwei are all officers in the 3rd Department of the Chinese Liberation Army Unit 61398. A federal grand jury in the Western District of Pennsylvania indicted the 5 Chinese military officials on May 1st, but the case was only unsealed on Monday. It's unlikely that the Chinese military hackers will end up in a U.S. federal court, but the charges represented a significant action by the U.S. government and in some ways an acknowledgement that diplomatic and public efforts to make the Chinese government hold them accountable had failed. Attorney General Eric Holder said the Obama administration will not tolerate actions by any nation that seeks to illegally sabotage American companies and undermine the integrity of the fair competition and the operation of a free market. No, that's our job. That's what the NSA does. We'll undermine our own companies by making their security weaker. Will undermine the integrity of fair competition by interfering in free markets. That's what the U.S. will do. We're not going to have the Chinese do it. We'll do it. Story number 8 from the Atlantic, Thomas Piketty and the end of our peaceful coexistence with inequality. Economic disparities aren't new, but from Piketty to the Pope, talking about them is. 2 years ago, I wrote inequality would be the central theme of 2012. It has always existed. Okay, blah. And that's what happened. The 1% versus the 99% became a global catchphrase. In 2012, there were 25% more academic articles about inequality than the previous year. Notable world figures like Pope Francis and Barack Obama declared inequality the defining issue of our time, and how to fight it became an unavoidable topic in electoral debates everywhere, even in countries like Brazil. where over the past decade income inequality has steadily declined. And now comes Thomas Piketty to say he's a French economist who recently published a dense 700-page tome, Capital in the 21st Century, that quickly became an international bestseller. Does not do justice to the impact of the book and author. Piketty is a social, intellectual, media phenomenon as well as an editorial success. His main thesis is that economic inequality is the inevitable collateral effect of capitalism, and that if governments don't act decisively to contain it, mostly through higher taxes on wealth and incomes, it will steadily grow until it seriously threatens democracy and economic stability. According to Piketty, inequality grows when the rate of return on capital, R, is larger than the growth of the economy, G. Or in his already well-known formulation, inequality grows when R is greater than G. The unexpected popularity of the lofty academic books isn't new. The truth, however, is that economic inequality has been a serious problem for most of the world's population for a long time. These inequities are nothing new in Latin America and Africa, the regions with the most unequal income distribution, and in many countries with historically high inequality. The main driver of the division is not R greater than G, but rather C greater than H, where C stands for corruption and H for honesty. Pretty weak. Pass off. Inequality became the lightning rod that is today only when wealth and incomes become as concentrated in the United States as they have been in other highly unequal countries. This superpower has an unrivaled ability to export and globalize its anxieties. In this case, it's good news that the problem afflicting Americans is also important for people elsewhere who have passively tolerated inequality for too long. One hopes a debate underway in the U.S. and Europe will result in actions that will effectively improve the ways in which income and wealth are distributed. Story number 7. It's like Thailand army declares martial law from the BBC. The Thai military has imposed martial law amid a political crisis, quote, to preserve law and order, unquote, but says the surprise move is not a coup. In response, the acting prime minister urged the army to act, quote, under the constitution and, quote, with no violence. Soldiers have taken over TV and radio stations and blocked off roads in the capital, Bangkok. Martial law comes after months of escalating tensions between government and the opposition. Correspondents say the move could enrage supporters of the government, especially if it is seen as amounting to a coup. The army has staged at least 11 coups since the end of the absolute monarchy in 1932. Army Chief Prayuth Chan-ocha called on rival parties to talk to each other and resolve the political crisis. Martial law will remain in place until peace and order have been restored, he told government officials on Tuesday. Soldiers have moved into the main government building in Bangkok, which has been unoccupied following months of violent demonstrations by opponents who want to be rid of the administration they say is corrupt. The military has also ordered the media censorship in the interest of, quote, national security, unquote. Both pro and anti-government protesters have been told not to march anywhere in order to prevent clashes. Good times. Story number 6. From the Daily Dot, this is how terrible U.S. broadband service really is. The U.S. has its fair share of issues when it comes to the internet, between the National Security Agency's mass surveillance and the ongoing battle over net neutrality. With so many entities threatening the fundamental nature of the internet, improving the quality of America's internet has, for the most part, fallen off the radar. If you were to tell someone in Hong Kong or Singapore how much you pay for your broadband internet service in the U.S., the speeds you receive in return, they would be shocked. America may have invented the internet, but we have seriously fallen behind with the speed of our broadband networks and how much we pay to access a utility that has become essential across the world. The U.S. is ranked 30th in the world in broadband speeds, behind the likes of Iceland, Romania, Bulgaria, France, Russia, and the U.K. To put that ranking in perspective, the U.S. men's soccer team, a sport that 99.1% of Americans quit before their 10th birthday, really, is ranked 13th in the world, and we definitely didn't invent soccer. Where's that stat from? We also pay for much less. Also paid more for much less, shelling out an average of $55 a month. I wish it was that low for broadband service, while countries with faster connections like France, Russia, and the UK all come in at under $45. Even the citizens of Hong Kong, which averages the fastest internet speeds in the world, pay over 40% less than American customers, with an average cost of $31 a month. God, this is depressing. So, yeah, that's great. We're going to give all these telecom people monopolies, and they aren't even providing very good service. Great. Story number 5 from National Public Radio. As court fees rise, the poor are paying the price. In Augusta, Georgia, a judge sentenced Tom Barrett to 12 months after he stole a can of beer worth less than $2. In Iona, Michigan, 19-year-old Kyle DeWitt caught a fish out of season, then a judge sentenced him to 3 days in jail. What the bleep? In Grand Rapids, Michigan, Stephen Papa, a homeless Iraq war veteran, spent 22 days in jail, not for what he calls his embarrassing behavior after he got drunk with friends and climbed into an abandoned building, because he had only $25 the day he went to court. The common thread in these cases, and scores more like them, is the jail time wasn't punishment for the crime, but for the failure to pay the increasing fines and fees associated with the criminal justice system. A year-long NPR investigation found that the costs of the criminal justice system in the United States are paid increasingly by the defendants and offenders. It's a practice that causes the poor to face harsher treatment than others who commit identical crimes and can afford to pay. Some judges and politicians fear the trend has gone too far. A state-by-state survey conducted by NPR found that defendants are charged for many government services that were once free. Great. Speaking of poor and rich, story number 4 from DealBook. Credit Suisse pleads guilty in felony case. It's like the first time a bank has finally faced a criminal charge. Not that anybody's going to pay for it or anything. Credit Suisse has done what no other bank of its size and significance has done in over 2 decades. Pled guilty to criminal wrongdoing. In a sign that banking giants are no longer immune from criminal charges, despite concerns that financial institutions have grown so large and interconnected they are too big to jail, federal prosecutors demanded that Credit Suisse parent company plead guilty to helping thousands of American account holders hide their wealth. As part of a deal announced on Monday, the Swiss bank met the demands, agreeing to one count of conspiring to aid tax evasion in a scheme that, quote, spanned decades, unquote. Credit Suisse, which has a giant investment bank in New York and whose chief executive is an American, will also pay about a $2.6 billion fine and penalties and hire an independent monitor for up to 2 years. The rebuke from federal prosecutors, as well as from the Federal Reserve and New York State's banking regulator, Benjamin Losky, is intended as a blow against overseas tax dodging and the shadowy world of Swiss bank secrecy. The deal also signals a shift in prosecutors' tactics. It is the most prominent bank to plead guilty in the United States since Drexel Burnham Lambert in 1989, and the largest to do so since the Bankers Trust in 1999, a bank a fraction the size of Credit Suisse. How about that? Beginning of a change, or this is just a one-off? Who knows? Story number 3. From Time Magazine, salaries of public university presidents rocket despite spiraling student debt. A new report by the progressive think tank Institute for Policy Studies finds that salaries for the top 25 highest paid public research university presidents have swelled in recent years despite the growth of student debt and various faculty disenfranchisement issues. While salaries for the top 25 highest paid public research university presidents have swelled in recent years, student debt and faculty spread has grown since a new study. A report released on Sunday by the progressive think tank Institute for Policy Studies looked at how that inflated pay correlated to dwindling funds allocated to student scholarships and a trend toward more part-time adjunct professor positions, which do not require benefits and other forms of compensation. Is actually something Thomas Frank talked about recently. So from 2009 to 2012, executive compensation at public research universities increased 14% to an average of $544,554, while compensation for presidents at the highest paying universities increased by a third to $974,000. Administrative spending outstripped scholarship spending by more than 2 to 1 at state schools with the highest paid presidents. Marjorie Wood, one of the study's co-authors, told the New York Times that the high executive pay obviously isn't the direct cause of student debt or cuts in labor spending, but if you think about it in the terms of allocation of resources, it does seem to be the tip of a very large iceberg with universities that have top-heavy executive spending also having more adjuncts, more tuition increases, and more administrative spending. Story number 2 is from Oregon Live, the Oregonian. Oregon gay marriage ban struck down by federal judge. Same-sex marriages begin. How about that? Oregon's ban on same-sex marriages was struck down Monday by U.S. District Judge Michael McShane, who ruled that the prohibition violated the federal constitutional rights of gays and lesbians. Jubilant couples who anticipated a favorable decision from the judge began to rush to officially wed at locations around the state. McShane ordered that his ruling take immediate effect. Quote, because Oregon's marriage laws discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation without a rational relationship to any legitimate government interest. The laws violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Oregon becomes the 7th state where a federal judge has struck down a gay marriage ban since the U.S. Supreme Court last year invalidated key sections of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. And the number one story from yours truly, Firedog Lake. White House promises no more CIA-staged vaccinations after polio outbreak. 3 years ago, the CIA staged a phony vaccination program in Pakistan as part of an espionage operation to track down Osama bin Laden. A Pakistani doctor, Shakil Afridi, used the cover of a hepatitis B vaccination program to gain access to an area where bin Laden was believed to be hiding. Afridi's operation failed, though bin Laden would be ultimately killed by U.S. forces later that year. After the bin Laden raid, Afridi was arrested and admitted to his role in the fake vaccination operation, saying he was introduced to CIA operatives by an employee of Save the Children. As a result of the CIA vaccination op, dozens of public health workers have been killed due to suspicion of being spies, and a polio outbreak has occurred from the people in Pakistan being wary in submitting to vaccination programs for fear the programs have some ulterior motive. Now the White House has claimed in a letter that the CIA will no longer be allowed to use vaccinations as cover for its intelligence operations. In a letter to leaders at a dozen schools of public health, President Obama's senior counterterrorism advisor said the CIA had banned the practice of making operational use of vaccination programs, adding that the agency would not seek to obtain or exploit DNA or other genetic material acquired through such programs. No word as yet as to whether Save the Children will agree to prohibit its employees from working with the CIA. Many Western NGOs also serve as conduits for U.S. intelligence operations. The U.S. government's own USAID was one of the central hubs for laundering money from Pakistan in the 1980s. And that would later become, in the 1980s, what would later become Al-Qaeda. Whether or not the people of Pakistan or elsewhere will be satisfied with the White House's promise remains to be seen. It's not a good idea to do this because people won't take vaccinations because they'll be afraid that they're being used in intelligence ops, obviously. And as a top 10 at 10, if you have a story you'd like me to feature on the top 10 at 10, please tweet me at Dan S. Wright. Be sure to read all the stories at FiredogLake.com. Thanks for watching. See you there.